Okay, time for something a little different. We're going to go over some terrain. I got a lot of terrain projects in the works, so in order to help me be a little more on the ball with them, I'm going to start trying to put up some terrain projects alongside my painting and other videos. So what we've got here is a 3D printed Brotherhood of Steel field base. Its top is separate, front and bottom halves, and then I have some files from some other Kickstarters I have to print the piping, and that kind of covers the seam. And this is the front generator from the Modifius STL files for their vault. So this is like the vault door generator. So this is all 3D printed and then hot glued together. I find that hot glue works pretty good when I'm trying to do this stuff. And then attached to a board of MDF. I have a buddy of mine who fancies himself a bit of a woodworker, and he's gracious enough to cut the MDF boards to whatever size I need. So with MDF, once it's mounted and is ready for priming, I like to use a automotive filler primer, and that helps kind of get into all of the various layers, especially on this dome piece, and then I'll go through and sand them off. I'm not going to record those because obviously that's a lot of noise no one wants to hear as I knock over my glue gun. So for sanding, what I've got is this small electric sander. And so this is why you really don't want to hear me sanding. Very noisy. But this is great for being able to come in here and work on this lot. And depending on the project, for instance, I did a 3D printed vertibird, may have 2-3 more coats of primer in between sanding to get a nice smooth finish. As this is terrain and this is supposed to be concrete, I'm not going to be as focused on sanding. I'm going to want to knock these layers down because these were on the top and kind of smooth out the dome a bit, and a bit of work on the generator, but that's going to be pretty much it. Now, in addition, I've got some extra space in the front, so I'm going to be attaching various other pieces before we get over to the priming stand section. With the exception of, actually no, we'll do it with the tree. No, I'm going to do some trees, and I don't want those filler primed because I don't want to lose any detail. So what I'm going to do first is put some rubble. It's fallout. There's piles of rubble everywhere. Now, the best way of doing rubble, save up your sprues. This is just a very small collection of them. And then go to like a thrift store or check on eBay, and what you want is an old school food chopper or, you know, meat grinder, sausage grinder. What you're looking for and why you want an old one, new ones, the piece that actually turns and does the grinding is plastic. Well, you can't chop plastic with plastic. You're gonna just ruin the awl or whatever it's called in the middle. What you're looking for is one that has an all metal piece like this. Another buddy of mine has this, and he's kind enough to let me keep a hold of it since he wasn't using it in order to process things. So all it is this piece goes in here, there's a screw on there, it attaches to a table, put your sprue pieces in there and grind away, and they'll come out the section here just like sausage. And it makes awesome rubble. So, I have some I prepared earlier, providing I can find it. And this is why you always want to prepare your stuff ahead of time. Where did my bag processed terrain go? This is giant pain because I know I have it. I'm going to use those two. That's a giant bag of stone. Bloody hell. I know I have a giant bag of this shit somewhere. Alright, so after ransacking everywhere, I found my bag of sprue pieces. As you can see, they grind down into small sections. What you're looking for is a very irregular consistency. And so what we're going to do is apply these at different sections. And to do this, I'm just using Pba glue. I'm not even really watering it down. And I just want to kind of put a puddle of it. And then I'm just taking these sprue pieces and just kind of mixing it in there. And not all of it's going to stick. So we just kind of use these for the next batch. And what's going to happen when I put the filler primer, that'll also help seal that in there. And so we're just going to apply some more piles of rubble. You can also apply these piles anywhere that you think you need to kind of cover up any mistakes you might have made during assembly. Again, we're just going for some irregular shapes here. We don't want it symmetrical either, so we don't want to apply piles on each side opposite how we did things. So since we did forward and center, we're gonna, and then this one's kind of in that corner, I'm gonna go ahead and put some right here next to this duct work that I've attached. Just gonna take these leftover ones. Should all stick there. So that looks pretty good. In addition, I have some model train rocks. These are already colored, so I'm not actually going to attach these at this point. I'm going to go ahead and prime. And then once the primer is dried and I've done some sanding, I'll start applying those and some tree stands and stuff I have. So real quick, I just wanted to show the first layer of primer down and sanding done, just to get an idea when you're working with FDM prints, and to a lesser extent resin printing, because resin has a much finer layer line. What you're looking for the primer to do is fill in the gaps between these layer lines, and then you're coming in and just knocking down the tall stuff, and just kind of smoothing so you're lowering the plastic down to the layer of the paint. So that's why you can start seeing the black of the actual print peeking through. And then I'll just apply another coat to it and do the same thing. Already right here, for instance, is pretty smooth. You can kind of run your nail over it and barely percept any ridge. There's more ridge detail at the top that's coming through, so that'll need to be knocked down. And I'm not looking to get this perfect, as this is just a terrain piece, but I'll do at least one more coat and sand, and then we'll move on to base coating. So we now have our terrain base coated, and with a couple add-ons. We got our rock piles and whatnot, and we've sanded it to about where I care about for this particular project. There's still some layer lines showing, but overall this print didn't come out super good anyway, so I'm not too fussy with it. So our next step is to spruce up this board a bit more. So to that end, first thing we're going to do is apply some of these rocks. Now these are just from a train store. As I said before, they're pre-colored and everything. You can just stick them on and go. I'll wind up repainting them a little bit, because I'm going to have to take care of the basing material, and I don't want to glue these on top of the basing material. So I'm just going to take a couple of these, and in fact, I think I'll go with 3. I want to put one on one of the sides too. So these are just plaster, basically, with some quick dry brushing already done on them. You can get the same effect just by going to your local hardware store and picking up some cedar chips. The important thing is the cedar chips need to be dried out first. You can do this just by leaving them in the sun for a bit, baking on a very low heat, very low. Remember, they're wood, they'll catch fire. So just make sure there's no moisture. The whole point behind no moisture is if they do have moisture, the glue is not going to adhere them. So I'm just using, off camera here, the Pba Glue. And all I'm doing is I'm just going to stick this directly to the board. I'm not worried if the PBA kind of squidges out a bit, because our next step after attaching these few pieces is going to be to apply PVA to the entire board. I'm also going to put one on the side here, and then another one out the front. And I'm just basically trying to apply these as like a rock formation. Always think about what you're placing and how it's going to interfere with model movement, and are you placing cover. So my idea here is this is cover that can be used from either side to either assault or defend the doorway into the location, as well as just looking cool. Now, I also have these Woodland Scenics tree armatures. So what I'm doing is just going to break these apart. I'm not going to glue the armature in, because this means I can take it off for transport and not have to worry about it getting banged during movement and ripping the base off. Always important to note. I will be painting the armature and the base and everything. So the way these work, if you've never dealt with them, is you just kind of go in here and you twist the trunk. It's actually very pliable, and that's how you wind up with the branches So I'm just kind of rotating these all. And the branches themselves are highly posable too. So just right there in a couple seconds I've already got it pretty well set. Alright, so that will sit right at the edge like that, so that looks good. So again, applying Pba glue to the bottom here, and we just want that kind of sticking there. And again, that gives a bit of cover for people moving around this. Okay, so next up is actual flocking of this material. So I'm going for a wasteland look, obviously. So what I've done is I have sand that I got from, again, any hardware store, dried it out. You can put some of it on a cookie sheet and low heat again. And I've also got large and smaller ballast, is what they're called when you get them from a train store, but just rocks, so that it breaks up how everything appears. And what I've got here is a disposable cup with some water, and I'm just going to add Pba glue to it, because we're going to apply this all over the base, and it doesn't have to be thick. You can water it down. I have a brush I use for most of my terrain work. Nice, big. I use this for paint and for PBA. So I'm just trying to mix the PBA in with the water. Probably got way too much water. And actually what I may wind up doing is putting this into a sealable container so that I can have watered down PVA available for the multitude of terrain projects. So I'm just stirring this all up until it gets to a consistency that we like. And you could just, not bother watering down the glue, but as hobbyists, our budgets tend to be limited, and full strength PVA is just not needed for sticking down small things like flock. If you go too heavy, you can wind up with PVA pooling and drying oddly. So basically thinning this down for the same reason we thin down our paints. We want to be able to apply them in a nice thin coat that will look good. Alright, and so if you can kind of see here, I'm going for a kind of a milky consistency, which is pretty much what I look for in my paint too. Don't worry if it's a little chunky. PBA glue is not exactly, known for its ability to blend well. Alright, and we're just going to go in here and apply it. Now with the tree stand, I want to get up onto the tree stand and make sure that there's glue there, because I want to have it blended with the rest of the base. And the other reason we water it down is it's going to take it longer to dry, so it allows us to work with large sections like this and not have to worry about one section drying before we're ready to move on to it. Going around these rocks. Up to the generator. Now I'm going to rotate this so I can actually see the opposite side as I'm working. Again, up to the rocks. Actually going to kind of tuck in here a bit too. Alright, so before this dries, we're going to want to just basically pour the sand onto it. So this is going to be a little hard to show on camera, but I'm going to kind of go over the technique here. So what I do is I take a Tupperware that I've absconded with from our home collection. Just don't get caught, or just buy your own so your significant other does not assault you. And I'm just going to pour it and allow it to drain off, basically. This way I can recover anything that doesn't stick. And the heavier stuff probably won't stick much. And actually, what we're going to do is, once this is on here, we're going to leave it to dry like this. So right now we're just using the bucket in order to catch what comes off as I'm pouring this on. And then once it's dry, I'll basically shake it off back into this container and then pour it back into the Ziploc bag that I've got everything stored. So we're not really caring about how neat stuff looks right now. Just trying to get it. Oop. You may even want to do this outside as opposed to at your desk like I am, as I almost knock over my cup full of PBA. Just so that you're not making too big of a mess. I have a dedicated mess area, so I'm not overly concerned about it. And that's why you might want to do it outside. Alright, so we're just going to sit that there and give it probably a couple hours to dry, at least. And we want to look back where we were at the original. You can kind of see right there, there's not... like you're starting to see the moisture come through, so you want to apply some more to those areas, because if the moisture is coming through, that means it has excess ability to grab on and put more flocking. And already, honestly, just if it were to dry like this, maybe not as high as the sand piles and some of it, it would look great. Once you do some painting on top of it. But of course it's not going to keep. It's not going to stay this way. So I'm going to let it dry, shake off the excess, and we'll be back. So we've done with waiting for our glue to dry. Also I went ahead and did a clear coat. This helps kind of lock especially the smaller sand particles into place. Now you will see that certain spots are not as coated as others, and this is fine. Terrain isn't level, we're not looking for level. So we'll also see that there's some dust that's come up on the sides, which is fine. What we don't want is for rocks to be really high up where they wouldn't be, that sort of thing. So we can take a stiff brush and kind of go around and just clean up some of that if we don't like where it is. Also, if there's any that got where we don't want it to be, you can always just flick that off. But otherwise that looks good. There's a bit more on the entranceway than I'd like, so we're just gonna do that. And then I can take my airbrush with no paint and just kind of use it to blow it away. So our next stage is going to be to apply color to this. The sand looks fine, but It's kind of raw and unshaded. So what we're going to be doing is taking the airbrush and applying some coats. Now, the general plan on this is the sides are going to be black, and these pillars and everything are going to be stone with the metal pipes. And then of course the blue of the generator. So what I'm going to do is do the black sections last. That'll allow me to have overspray, and then I will go in and probably just paint the black back onto the rest of it, just to allow myself to utilize the airbrush in a rather careless manner, which is my favorite way of using it. So now, as I've mentioned before in my other videos, I use a Towelite Ochre for kind of my dirt. So what I've got here is a yellow ochre, which is a very close air version of it. I'm not sure if they make Towelite Ochre in GW Air, and I haven't really bothered to check. So what we're going to do is just start doing coats of this on the board. So we will see how that goes. Now, one thing is that we are going pretty heavy, so what I'm going to do with my airbrush is I'm loosening the back nut and moving the needle out a bit. Not enough so that it paints without using the trigger, because I use a dual action airbrush, but enough that it means that the trigger isn't as sensitive. Because we're not looking for sensitivity, we're just kinda looking to get at the We also don't care much about the rocks and stuff like that, because we're just going to paint some of those to be a darker shade. Basically doing the same dark gray, light gray that we use with our facing techniques, all to just kind of tie it together. Now, even with sealing, you're going to see some flecks coming off. That's to be expected. If you have any areas that after are really bad, well, that's why we have foliage that we can apply. So I will be applying things like dried lichen as bushes and that sort of thing. And so that's why you're not going to ignore these areas, but you're also not going to care about them, because you're really going to come back and apply more over. Also, you can apply additional rocks, anything like that. Now, I do have a compressor with a tank. You just heard it refilling. I highly recommend, if you're going to get an airbrusher, to just go ahead and go ahead and get a tank variant. They're a lot easier to work with and have way less noise. You can see some of that flecked up a bit, but that's fine. Like I said, between tufts and foliage, we'll bring it back to how we want it. The other reason for sealing it, besides protecting it from kind of flying up as we're airbrushing here, is we're also going to apply a wash after. And so we want it to be able to withstand the brush. We're not going to be heavily brushing it on. We'll be more dripping it than anything. but we still want to make sure that it doesn't have any trouble. And almost done here. Now, this does use up paint a lot faster, not just because I've loosened that needle, but also because we're just doing such a large surface. So anyone who's cost conscious may just want to use some craft paint that's been watered down. Most craft paint you're going to need to water a lot to shoot through an airbrush, but it will cut down on your costs. I'm a bit lazy, however, so I like to just go ahead and use what I've got. Plus, I pretty much just bought that paint for doing terrain, if not my Tau army. Alright. Couple extra spots to get. There we go. Now clean my airbrush, and once I'm done with that, this should be dry and we can move on to our wash. Alright, so I've gone ahead and done the gray. I painted the generator in kind of a funky blue to try and match how it appears in the vault. And then the front, I've gone ahead and used a stencil. So one of the things I also do is 3D printing, and I had a resin 3D printer for a while, and something I found super great with them is making stencils. I found several patterns on Thingiverse and was able to use them. So this is just a quick Brotherhood of Steel logo for the front door, which I have gone ahead and done the door in blue and just that stencil in white. Now I just have to recover my silly putty that I use. I find silly putties great for masking and also attaching the stencils, because I can just pop it off like that and we're good to go. There we go. So nice little clean logo on the front, and I'll be brown washing that as well, just in order to kind of tone things down. So what I've got to do next is take some black and basically clean up the sides, and I'm going to do that with a brush, not an airbrush. And once it's clean, I'll also apply metallic to the pipes, and then we will mix up and do our wash. So let me go ahead and clean that up, and then we will do the wash. So we have gone ahead and applied some dark gray to the sides and metallics to the piping and a little bit on the generator on the back now. So we're ready to proceed with our wash. So I've got one of my mixing cups. I've just got some water in here because we're going to create our wash out of some cheap artist acrylic paints that I got from a local craft store. So what we're going to do is just add this and mix it up. So as with most acrylic paints, it can be very thick. So to make a wash, you need just a little bit. Now, for the building itself, I'm going to go with this straight brown and use that as my wash. And then what we will do out here is I then have a bit of yellow to kind of lighten it a bit. So it is a rather reddish brown. I'm fine with that for the building and the generator, but for the outside, for the dirt, I want it to be lightened up a bit. So what we're looking is just for the consistency here. Right now it's still a little too watery. So I'm going to just add some more. And if you're going to do a lot of train work, you can go ahead and mix this up and then save it. Add it to a storage bottle of some kind. Because you don't want to be wasting, you know, for instance, Agrax Earthshade or any other purchased wash just on doing terrain work. Alright, that's looking a little better there. It looks like the paint isn't fully breaking up, so we're just gonna, we may take a brush and stir it a bit more as well. I'm just trying to get that pigment fully integrated. Alright, so that's a lot better. You can see that. Still very watery consistency, but we've got some actual color. So I'm going to set that off to the side. And for this, I want a large but also fairly soft brush. For the building, it's not as important, but for painting the dirt, I don't want to disturb the ground as much, so this is a fairly soft application. So again, I'm just going to kind of stir this up a bit. Make sure I'm getting all the fragments mixed in there. And then I'm just going to start from the top and work my way down. And I'm just trying to apply this all over. And that consistency is good. That's what you want to see with a wash. You want to see it settling into the cracks, into the corners. Because this thing's been sitting out here for a long time, so obviously it's going to have grime and whatnot built up on it. Now, because this is 3D printed, it's going to tend to sit into any large cracks that we haven't taken care of with our sanding, and that's to be expected. Okay, yeah, that's good. Since this is the top of the building, this is also going to pool in any recesses we have, kind of at the top there, which is also fine, because if you stop and think about it for a moment, when rain goes onto the roof of a building, it collects in exactly the same way, and that's what we're trying to simulate here. We want it pooling in all of those areas, just as years of rainwater would have. I'm not too worried about being heavy on the top part there, on these little corner pieces, because I do want some runniness of it. Some of this paint still hasn't broken up. And so we're just going to apply this all around. Because if this drips down the columns, good, because that's exactly as water should behave. And here we got a little too much pigment caught on the brush, but that's fine. Make sure to try and break it up if you're seeing any of it build up. As I'm painting these edges, I'm also going pretty heavy on that. Alright, and we don't want this drying, because our next step is to go ahead and take some paper towel and just wipe this off. And we're not trying to wipe everything off, we're just trying to wipe it away from like these main large areas. So see, we're leaving it collected in the corners and everywhere else. Be careful not to do what I just did, where your paper towel gets so weak that it gets kind of picked up there. But yeah, so there we go. So that's exactly how we want it. You see it's collecting into all the edges. Yep. So now we're going to go along the sides here and do the same thing. Now, with the way this particular model was done, they have these kind of lines here, and so that makes it super hard to work with because they're so deep that everything just kind of hides into them. So we're not too worried about them, but we do want, obviously, this generator. While we love the nice bright blue, it needs to be tapered down. Brought more in line with something that's been sitting outside for a couple hundred years. Especially with the metal bits I did on the bottom there to kind of break that blue up a little. Alright. And let's get the column here. Kind of hard to see, but there we go. And the opposite side, and then we're going to take a fresh piece of paper towel. You can also just use a sponge to bring it all back. But I don't have any laying around, so we'll stick with what I've got. Alright, so again, I'm just going to come in here and wipe off most of this, especially on our generator, and see, so that gets a nice worn appearance. There we go. Alright, so yes, so all of the brown is staying into the recesses and the lines and giving it a nice worn appearance now. And we're just going to do the same thing around the side here. We only have to do one column since we already did the other one. And again, these lines are going to wind up sopping up a lot of this. So we're not super concerned about them. Just about getting it in. And then the pipe work, a little too heavy on there, that's fine. We're wiping most of it away. Alright. And for some of this you want to wipe down and then don't wipe as much on the bottom, because naturally your stains are going to go down and pool more towards the bottom of the structure. Alright. Alright, let's get this column. I think we got too much, didn't get enough applied on this particular one, so apply a bit more. Same on this side. Alright, just kind of set it wipe down. And I do want a little bit of staining on that white to remain, so I'm just going to kind of dab on the door, because I don't want that symbol to be such a garish white in comparison to everything else. So, final side here. Get these pipes. And the other side of this column. Okay. Alright, so that's the building itself done, and you can take a moment to look and see if you need to improve anything. Because I was rotating this around as I was working on it, you can see that a lot of this has now kind of changed how it pooled, and also due to gravity has some of the more liquid has kind of created these run marks. I like that, and I want to keep that run mark, so I will not be going back over those. Now I'm going to add a bit of yellow into my mix here. Alright. Stir this up some to lighten it. I'm also going to add some more water to this. Oops. And there I go, making a mess. And I've got my water. I would have just taken it to a tap, but since we're working on this right now, I don't want to run off and do that, so just use my water for thinning paint. Alright, so there's that. And that's made it a little closer to a brown than reddish brown. Now, it does still seem a bit thick to me, so we're just going to add even more water. And we're just going to, real quick, I'm still seeing some of that yellow in there. Yeah, I see there's still some paint stuck on the brush, so let's try and clean that off. Alright, so we're just going to apply to this rubble pile, and so I'm not really painting it, I'm dabbing it on, and yep, that's what I want to see. So it's darkening it, but it's still keeping that yellow that I started with, which is exactly what I want. So we're just going to start dabbing this everywhere. I see there's still a lot of paint at the bottom of this though, so let's try and get that mixed up, because I don't want to be slathering paint. There we go. Don't be afraid to get right up to the model. honestly, this brush is a little too small, so where is my... Oh, I know where my giganto brush is. Let me grab that. Alright, so my friendly giant brush. I also added a bit more water to the mix. And we move on. So this will allow me to apply it a lot quicker. Again, not brushing, just kind of patting. Now in some cases it may pool a bit, so it'll take longer to dry, especially now that I've swapped over to the big brush. If that becomes an issue, just come back with the brush once you've finished applying and sop it up a bit. Alright. Just rotating it so I can continue to work without having to bend over the other side of the model. And just dab it on. Same on this side. The other thing is, since there is paint in here, this will actually act as another layer of sealant to help protect the sand from blowing off. And we will be doing a final actual sealing coat as well, but that will be after we dry brush a couple things. My current plan is to pick out some details, so some of the rocks need to be, they got too much yellow on them, so obviously those will have to be repainted. And then some dry brush on the larger pieces of rubble pile and these rock bits that I added. Then we'll seal it, and then after sealing we will apply any tufts and any lichen. Lichen makes good brambly bushes, so for a wasteland they look pretty good. And we do that after sealing. And see right there, that's why we had to be careful of kind of pop that rock loose. But there should be enough liquid and paint to seal it back down. But yeah, so lichen and some tufts all over. I'll even put some tufts probably on the roof, especially in like these corners and edge pieces to represent dirt buildup. We can already see that this has darkened that yellow to what I think is a more acceptable layer of dirt looking. Oh, that one came loose too. Those larger rocks especially don't. I probably shouldn't have added those to the mix and should have those added in just glued on separately. Kind of like what I did with these large scale ones. That's fine. It's been a while since I put a terrain piece together. Mistakes will be made and are easily fixed. Okay. Alright, so obviously this is going to take several hours to dry, so we're going to allow that to happen, and we will be back with doing some detail work and dry brushing. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead and work on some of the details. You can see I base coated the tree there. I did a gray because I'm going to try and do a diluted brown over it. As we want that, kind of weathered dead tree look going on. But first we're going to go ahead and focus on doing some of the detail work. So first thing we're going to do is take some metallic and work on the lights in the front a little bit. So we're just taking some Runefang steel, and we're going to go ahead and paint them first. And I'm trying to get both the light and the surrounding mount. So we're just getting that a little. And the ones on the bottom are not as well formed, plus they got some sand all over them. Alright, so we're just going to let that sit and dry real quick. And then while that's doing that, we're going to pick out some rocks. So we're going to take our Necromancer cloak, get to the point where I'm going to need to replace some of this soon. Water it a little, mix it up, and so we're just trying to hit some of the rocks that maybe picked up too much yellow, so like this one here, definitely this one. And we're not going to do the same color for every rock. These large ones that we put down, I think we're just going to leave as is. That one there in the corner looks pretty good already and matches these nicely, so we're going to leave it. So we're just trying to break up our coloring a little. We can have multiple colors of rock since we have that in nature. Mostly we want to focus on the ones that got too yellow, since that's not really a normal color you see too terribly much. These smaller ones will leave some of them. I also want to have some of these that are next to other colors, simply because if you got both colors next to each other, it adds to them all kind of looking correct. Nothing really on the back edge to do. Maybe a couple here. Yeah, that'll do. I said don't have to do too terribly much. much yellow sticking through there. Alright, now for the lights we're going to use our Lichen yellow contrast just in the center of these to make these lights. We're basically just dabbing it to the middle. The bottom ones especially, since they're not as well formed. Just have to be careful. Alright, that's good. So I've just set those to dry. Now for our rubble piles, we're going to go ahead and do some dry brush. So we're going to take our ash gray. Since we're dry brushing, we're not going to apply any water to it. I'm going to take my older, softer dry brush, because again, we don't want to separate any of the materials. And just with a circular motion, we're going to get rid of most of that paint. Just kind of making sure it's in there. And then what we're really looking to do is just dry brush these rubble piles. There we go. Give them a nice little bit of highlight there. Alright. We can also do a light tap just on some of these that we picked out. And call it done. Alright, so next up is the tree. For the tree, I want to go ahead and, as I mentioned, dilute it a little. So we're going to take our contrast medium. We're going to do a couple drops of it. And we're going to use the Gorgrunta fur that we've used on wood in the past for other models. And 2 drops of that. So just an even amount. And what we're going to do is just work from the top down. Mostly I'm going to be focusing on getting the trunk, try and get it a little darker. Because I tend to find that branches are more, a slightly lighter color in a lot of cases. What with them being thinner and younger than the trunk in a lot. So that kind of makes a bit of sense, at least in my mind. Of course, I had my brush. I set my brush down, and as we all know, if I set anything down, it magically disappears. Nope, there it is. Okay. Just mix the paint a bit. And I'm just going to apply a little bit at the bottom here first. That's a bit more than I want, so let's just go ahead and wipe that off. And we're going to go ahead and dilute it even more. Because I basically just want the brown to be settling. In fact, let's just try and use our Agrax. Rather than contrast, let's see if Agrax is going to do what I want it to instead. And actually I like that better. I like the darker tone, and it's much easier to pull it around. So we're just going to go with that. Never be afraid to change your idea. Especially if it doesn't look to be working the way you want it to. In fact, I'm not super happy with that brush. Take too long. I think just using my previously used dry brush will do this a lot better. So let's just, oop, ugh, well, that's not good. We'll soak that up. Used too much, yeah, that wasn't good. Alright. Just trying to make sure that all these branches are coated on every side. And then bring the color down. Get the next branch. We're going to go ahead and just kind of soak up the majority of that. That won't look too terribly out of place since we kind of have that roof grimy to begin with. Make sure we're not missing any spots as we go along. Because this is the contrast primer, it does help the flow of contrast, so it will also help the flow of the wash. Alright, let's pick up a bit more. Let's just hold that. There we go, yep. A little bit in the... Doesn't hurt to go back and look at what you've already done. Make sure you're getting all of the recesses. You don't want the gray showing through, at least not in an actual gray pattern. Dollop forming there, that's fine. Probably give us just enough to finish this up. I tend not to put the foliage on these, mostly because the foliage doesn't matter a wasteland, doesn't match a wasteland, and I just like the bare tree look. There are multiple ways of doing trees cheaper than getting these armatures. Plenty of videos online. If you have access to a 3D printer, you can easily 3D print some as well. I've done that. This is just a convenience to just deal with these. Alright, so there's looking for any outstanding gray. Making sure that trunk is good. Okay. Now, obviously this isn't going to match the stump we have here very well. It's not too bad. Let's go ahead, in fact, and kind of blend the wash in there a bit. As I said, I'm not mounting this permanently, so I can remove it for transport. Because trees and the like always get popped off pretty easily. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do prior to a seal is we're going to apply some lichen as bushes. Now, lichen, unlike the tufts I have applied before sealing, it just stiffens the lichen that way. I like that. If you don't want it stiffened, then apply it after. I'm using this autumn mix. Has some oranges, and what I really like is the brown, but the orange I actually think is kind of wild. So what we're going to do is just pull apart pieces and apply them with our handy dandy Pba glue. If I haven't ruined the seal, good. I accidentally left it open, so I don't need this whole chunk, so we're just going to peel off a piece, just tear it, and just kind of push it into the glue that we left there. And it'll be fine that way. We'll want to make sure any of these small, tiny chunks that kind of flake off, that we're not getting them anywhere. Also going to apply some next to this rock here. And don't be afraid to go heavy on the glue. You'll have to wait a bit for it to dry, but you'll have a nice solid connection point. Let's see. Let's go ahead and get... Placing these is also a good way of hiding any errors in the print or your paint job or anything like that. So these tend to have these core pieces like this. I just remove those if they're not going to be useful. Alright, I think that's enough there. And then I'm also going to take some of the yellow. What I'm going to do is actually break this bag apart and take a small Ziploc bag and sort it by color. It'll make it a lot easier to work with. So I'm going to take this yellow bit. I'm just kind of feathering it. I'm going to remove some of the bottom piece as well. And I'm going to apply it around the bottom of my tree to kind of hide this attachment point here. So I'm just going to take a lot of glue there. Bit too much glue went where we don't want it, but that's fine. We can fix it with the lichen. Need a bit more. Now, if you decide, for instance, that the orange is too bright or the yellow too plain, you can always also add, kind of drip in some wash just to shade it a bit. For me, I think it looks fine. Let's get rid of that. So what I'm going to do now is seal this, let it dry, and then come back and add some tufts for even some more additional kind of foliage on it. And so, let me show the front a bit there. Didn't notice it was out of camera, sorry about that. But yeah, so you can see that tree now has a bush around it, basically. Alright. So as we can see, the sealant has done its trick. I really do like how the trees come out there. The shading on it looks perfect. Now, one thing is here, this particular piece of lichen, I don't like how it's kind of stretched a bit. You don't want to pull too much because these can pop off pretty easily. So what I'm going to do is just take my snips and basically give it a little bonsai tree trimming here. Just because I didn't want that. So there we go. So as we can see, that took care of that. And we are all good to go. So next up is going to be applying tufts. This time I'm going to be using these Pba static grass. In addition to grass, they have some little bits of dirt associated with them. So I'm just trying to get these used up a bit. Not my favorite ones because I'm not a big fan of the dirt with them, but they're still quite nice. So I'm going to go ahead and just start kind of applying these all over. And what I will do is I'm going to put out some glue, and then I'm going to just pull, dab, and stick. So just pull these off. Ooh, not that they want to. Go from the edge, there we go. These are a little adhesive, but I don't trust them to stay, which is why I always use that little bit of PVA. I'm just kind of going to pop these all around, just where I think they look good. So we're going to kind of stick these in corners up top here, where we think that dirt may have acquired. We're not going to go super crazy with them. Just a few up top, I think. We should be good. There we go. And then let's just go ahead and put that one there. There we go. Add a bit of texture. Then we're going to take and put a couple more on the lower level. Again, we're just pulling from the edge on those. Get a bit of glue on them. So I'm going to put this up against our generator here. Just because this other side isn't bad. Doesn't have as much of anything. Just put that there. And then a small one, I think. Just kind of there in that rock. Alright, and that is done. The PVA glue will dry nice and clear. I'll double check that after, but this particular project is all set. So I think this will be a very commanding piece to any table. You know, just nice, either an abandoned Brotherhood bunker or a good spot maybe for the entrance to a Brotherhood settlement. just show it all off. Alright, so our next terrain feature is going to be converting some plastic-filled terrain, I believe. So I'm going to pull out and see what I want to work on, and we should have something up for next Tuesday.